¿Quién es? Vale, pues.
¿Me oyes tú, Pedro?
Perfectamente.
Voy a intentar poner la cámara, aunque mi imagen no es que sea lo más agradable de este mundo, pero al menos para probar que funciona. Te oigo entrecortado, Pedro.
Yo he puesto la mía, la cámara mía.
A ver, voy a quitar el vídeo, ¿vale? Para que no coja mucho ancho de banda. ¿Me oyes ahora?
Sí,
¿Me oyes ahora mejor, Pedro?
muy bien.
Muy bien.
Tú a mí
Pues estupendo. Te oigo ya como lejano, como lejano.
No sé por qué me hace eso esto.
Como
Bueno,
si
voy
va y
a ver.
viene.
Vale, voy a ver si me está dando algo.
¿Tienes el micrófono cerca de la voz o no?
No sé dónde tiene el micrófono. No hago más que moverme de un lado a otro. A ver si encuentro dónde está el ese. La señal que dice el micrófono parece buena. Y en recepción.
Te oigo mal, Pedro.
Es mal. Pues. Ahí.
¿Pero estás utilizando un micrófono cercano o no?
Estoy usando el micrófono del portátil.
Yo estoy con unos pinganillos y con el micrófono del pinganillo.
Ya, yo es que no me lo he traído hoy.
Ajá.
Entonces es peor. Escucharos escucho perfectamente.
Ahora se te oye mejor, Pedro.
Es que creo que tengo que hablar aquí a una esquina del
Ahora se te oye mejor. No sé qué coño has hecho.
pues hablar a un lateral del portátil.
Pues nada. Háblale, susurrale por el lado portátil.
Eso es. Por la oreja buena. Voy a ver una llamada.
Oye.
Dime.
Pedro.
Sí, dime.
Que tanto tú como el doctorando como el resto del tribunal sois conscientes de mi absoluta ignorancia en este tema. Sí.
Yo creo que los que saben del tema son los tres evaluadores de allí del sitio. Siempre han estado
Por
trabajando en
eso
esto. Que
yo creo
yo
que
tengo
serán
una
los
cierta
que...
idea, pero no lo he seguido con detalle.
Sí, pero
Tampoco
bueno, tú oyes un peine de frecuencias y sabes de qué va. Yo la primera vez que oí el peine de frecuencias fue una vez que nos diste tú una charlita. No
Pues
sé si
sí.
en un curso de doctorado o cuando...
Posiblemente fue una
¿Te
conferencia
acuerdas?
que me invitaste allí en la autónoma.
Y desde entonces no había oído hablar de los peines de frecuencia, con lo cual la aportación que puedo hacer a la evaluación de Héctor pues podrá ser pobre, por no decir otro adjetivo más negativo, y confío en que, bueno, quien de verdad lo examine en términos de conocimiento del tema sean el propio equipo francés, ¿no?
Yo en eso creo que son los que deben hacerlo. ¿Y has visto los informes que hicieron externos, los reports que te envié?
Sí.
Entonces, bueno, está claro más o menos el trabajo. Es una tesis muy técnica, realmente.
Sí.
Es complicado verlo fuera del mundo de los relojes ópticos, que a mí me sobrepasa.
Como te sobrepasa, no me jodas, pero si tú eres un experto en eso.
Sí, pero me sobrepasa porque yo he trabajado a otro nivel, a 10 a la menos 12, no a 10 a la menos 16.
Te quedan todavía algunos ceritos más.
Está ya 3, 4 ceros. En la cuenta bancaria no es tan mal, ¿eh? Al lado adecuado.
Exactamente. A ver dónde lo pone en la coma, no me jodas.
Bueno. Voy a ver que tengo una llamada.
Muy bien.
Pedro, muy buenas, ¿me escuchas? So it's not. Area.
Héctor,
Pedro, ¿me escuchas?
sí, pero se acopla el micrófono.
Vale. No sé motivo, la verdad. Ahora mismo se acopla.
Ahora sí se acopla.
Lo estamos corrigiendo o tratando de. ¿Ahora mejor? ¿Me escuchas? ¿Pedro?
Mejor.
Mejor. Vale, yo te escucho perfectamente.
Inés está conectado, puedes ver cómo le escuchas.
Profesor Infante, ¿me
Hola,
escucha?
Héctor. ¿Me escuchas? Héctor,
¿Me escucha?
no sé si tengo conectado el
Sí.
micrófono.
Ahora le escucho perfectamente.
Sí, aquí veo opciones para silenciar mi audio o activarlo. ¿Se escucha más o menos bien?
Sí.
Muy bien, Héctor. ¿Qué tal?
Se escucha, yo le escucho un poco bajo, pero bueno, le puedo escucharle.
Muy bien, pues estupendo.
Perfecto.
¿Cuántos miembros del jurado estarán presentes en tu presentación, Héctor?
Would we increase the volume from the jury members? The volume from... Pedro.
Dime.
Pedro, ¿me escuchas?
Sí, dime.
Vale, el tema es que yo te escucho muy bajo y si subimos el volumen esto no empieza a comprarse. Entonces, espero, no sé, lo suyo es que solo yo tenga activado el micrófono, el resto de los miembros que lo tenga desactivado y luego en las preguntas que cada uno lo active en su momento y en ese momento quizás subamos el volumen del altavoz aquí para que pueda escucharlo bien, porque lo escucho, me cuesta escucharlo un poco.
Perfecto, por mi parte.
Vale, perfecto, pues hacemos así. Ahora me quedo yo solo con el micrófono activado y luego ya le subimos un poco el volumen. Muchas gracias.
Héctor, voy a silenciar también mi audio, ¿te parece?
Perdón, voy a subir un poco, ¿se me escucho? ¿Ahora?
Te digo que voy a silenciar mi audio, si te parece ahora.
Vale, perfecto, estupendo.
Venga.
Muchas gracias. And now, Pascal, we can decrease it a bit because I will talk just me, and then for the questions, we should increase it so I can hear them well. This is the... Bonjour, madame. Yes. So everybody looks. You say so. Fantastic. Yeah, exactly. that is completely fine. It's just the YouTube channel is already a stream as the link, but this webcam that's supposed to film me here is not a stream. It's a stream on the Zoom session of Pascal. Pascal also can see it on his YouTube when he streams the YouTube on the Zoom. But for the rest of the people, okay, now it's working. Now I can see me. Hey, Pascal, now it's perfect. Now on the YouTube channel, this webcam is working and it's filming me here. Yeah, now it's perfect. Yeah, I don't know what you did, but it's working. So.
C'est bon, je peux retourner sur la pratique, effectivement. Je suis désolé parce que le problème, c'est qu'on n'est pas trop de télé. Tu ne peux pas choisir ta caméra de main, c'est eux qui restent. Et là, c'est lui pour le son de son PC, par exemple, c'est monter son micro. Son chip. Ça a un coup, c'est que lui va parler, son PC. Non, il n'y a pas de son micro. C'est déjà scène. Parce qu'il y a deux PC qui viennent comme ça. Elle va parler, il y a un micro, parce que la scène, c'est possible. Il y a un micro qui est là, il y a ici, il faut laisser le PC, le son du PC. Et puis, le problème, c'est que du coup, ce qu'il voit Zoom, c'est que je pense pas, il y a ce PC qui est actif, il y a tendance à mettre la webcam de ce PC. C'est lui qui choisit. Ah oui, c'est le truc de la Sinon, la solution, c'est qu'on débranche tout ça, on branche PC. Ah, et il y avait qu'un seul PC pour vous? Non, enfin, oui, ça arrive juste à rentrer les gens. Ah, oui, ça va couper les changements. C'est moi qui crée le jour, c'est ça? Non, c'est moi. Quatre jours pour laisser tout ouvert pour voir le Covid.
Oui, ça ne m'aura pas automatisé son truc.
Tous les ans, vous demandez des trucs différents, j'ai l'impression. Bon, puis vous me dites, bon, vraiment, c'est revenu, je peux remettre à comment vous.
Non, mais ça devait être résolu quand j'ai. C'est résolu exactement quand j'avais prévu le truc.
Now is it okay? Can you hear me? Now? Yes, yes. Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Okay. Looks good. So. Hello, hello.
Et là, voilà, la chose, pour la question, en fait, c'est la personne, la profession du mouvement, peut-être que les garçons, etc.
Oh, yeah, it's because I had it blocked. Yes, okay. Now it will appear. The sound is good? Okay. Ah, okay, perfect.
Bon, je sais pas s'il y a des questions. Rodolphe, on se met en compte et on lui laisse. On te laisse présider au milieu, ça va. Présidente devant. Au niveau paperasse, je ne sais pas ce qu'il faut faire. Alors moi,
Hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello.
Alors, procès-verbal de soutenance et je pense que le rapport de soutenance est juste en fait attaché avec ce document.
D'accord, donc moi, je vais chercher un bénéfice de leur demander en
Tu as deux personnes à toi, quelque chose dans le rapport de veste, tous les autres, je te donne des légalités.
Très bien, ok, super. So, ok.
This is not working now.
Oui, c'est moi qui récupère tout ça.
Même moi, j'en ai rien.
Il doit signer les directeurs des fêtes.
Hello, hello.
Oui, mais toi, tu es là, au pire, on va chercher tes notes, voilà, vous avez mais c'est bien, on a dit pour non, mais au pire, je vois mes collègues du cirque.
Hello.
Lundi, je vois, j'ai réunion.
Oui, non, la semaine prochaine, je serai pas là.
Ok. Sauf.
Taylor, ça te va qu'on laisse la porte ouverte?
Avec plaisir. Okay. So, good morning. My name is Saïda Belati. I'm from Conservatoire National des Arts et Métiers and Laboratoire Castler Bruxelles. It's a pleasure for me to have this committee. I just asked the member of the committee to present themselves.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm from Institut Grenoble. I used to work for a long time ago on frequency stabilization of the clocks. So pleased to be here your presentation.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Yannick Carsalé from FemtoST Besançon, and I'm working on the intrastable lasers and also optical frequency.
Thank you. Lucille.
Hello, so I'm Lucie Lortkowski from the Institut Physique de Rennes. I'm using frequency comps, but for spectroscopic applications. So it will be a nice opportunity to see it from another perspective.
Okay, so I'm Yann Lecoq. I'm the thesis director, one of the thesis director of this candidate. And I work here at CERT on optical frequency comps on ultrastable lasers.
And I'm Rodolphe Daria. I also work here at CERT, and I supervise the work of Hector in the lab in the last 3 years.
Thank you. And people from Madrid.
Yeah.
Please.
Pedro, Ginés, ¿me escucháis?
Sí.
Can you hear me, Pedro and Ginés?
Let me activate the audio.
It's okay.
Now, can you
The
hear me
president
now?
of the jury is asking for a short presentation or introduction of yourself.
Can you ask me now?
Yes.
Yes. I'm Ginés Lizante, professor at the University of Madrid, Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, and I'm the tutor of the thesis of Hector. Hello to everyone, especially to Hector.
Thank you.
And switch off the micro.
Hello.
Pedro.
This is Pedro.
Professor Pedro.
Okay.
Yes.
I am
Pedro, we cannot hear you.
We cannot hear you.
I am Scientific Research National Research Center in Madrid, and I am the director of the thesis of Hector. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Now you are Hector Alvarez Martinez. You have about 45 minutes to present us your work. Okay, you can start. Thank you.
Thanks for introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to proceed to defend my PhD work that has been devoted to accuracy and stability of frequency cone-based measurements and spectral purity transfer techniques for optical atomic clocks. And I have carried out this work during my last 3 years working at CERT in the Observatory of Paris. There is no doubt that experimental physics relies on the art of measuring precisely the right quantity within a given uncertainty. For instance, if we want to know how long is this stretch, first we need to find a reference to compare it to. And second, we need to choose a measuring tool that will provide us with an uncertainty. This is how well the marks of this ruler can resolve the unknown value. And with an accuracy, this is how well this ruler is attached to the definition of the meter.
Sorry, Hector. I cannot hear you. Sorry.
And there's only a given statistical resolution that can be reached. On the right-hand side, we can see that the more grouped the shots are, the better the stability, and the closer the average value to the center of the bullseye, the better the accuracy. In order to characterize the frequency stability, the most common time domain statistical tool we used is the Allen variance, that, similar to the standard variance, it measures the fractional frequency fluctuations, but it has the advantage that we can distinguish between the different kind of noises we find in oscillators. So it is clear that going for higher frequencies, like the optical ones, increases the resolution of our measurement tool. But for a very long time, it was very cumbersome, the way to connect these optical frequencies to the microwave ones, where all the time and frequency infrastructure is resting. Fortunately, optical frequency comms were born in 1999. An optical frequency comm is the output of a mod-log laser. This is a pulsed laser where the coupling between all the longitudinal modes contained in each pulse has a well-defined phase relation respect to each other. So when we do the Fourier transform of this train of pulses in the time domain, what we get is the spectrum of all the longitudinal modes that we call them teeth of the comm. These teeth are equally spaced by the inverse of the repetition period that corresponds to one cavity round trip, and we call it repetition frequency, FREP. On the other hand, and due to intracavity dispersion, there's a relative change between the phase of the carrier and the phase of the envelope that accounts for the absolute position of the comm, and we call it offset frequency, F0. In order to determine the frequency of any comm tooth, we need to know these two parameters plus the n-comm number, that is simply an integer around 10 to the 5 and 10 to the 6. The FREP is derived just sending the femtosecond laser to a fast photodiode, and it will give us with all the frequency, repetition frequency harmonics contained within the photodiode's bandwidth. For the F0, there are several ways, but the simplest and most popular option requires 1 octave so that we can frequency double the low frequency part of the comm and beat it with the high frequency part of the comm, and the coherent constructive interference of all these modes will yield the offset frequency. So we have seen that knowing the comm parameters, we are finally able to connect the microwave wall with the optical wall. And the comm, together with the necessary connections and components such as links, phase lock loops, filters, amplifiers, etc., will compress the frequency chain that in the end will allow us to compare the 7 atomic frequency standards that we have at CERT. We have 3 optical lattice clocks, 2 of them of strontium and 1 based on mercury. The 3 of them, they are interrogated by the ultra-stable clock lasers that are in turn locked to the respective cavities. And then we have 3 atomic fontaines, 2 of them based on cesium, and a third that is dual based on cesium and rubidium. These last, they are interrogated by a cryo-sapphire oscillator that is phase lock loop to an hydrogen maser. And this composes the ultra-stable microwave reference of all the labs at CERT. At the heart of this architecture, we also have 2 other independent frequency comms. So in total, we have 2 erbium doped fiber comms and 1 titanium sapphire comm. Here you can see an overview, a simplified overview of the whole frequency chain, where on top of the former atomic frequency standards, we have other reference lasers like the lattice lasers used to trap the atoms and other high stable sources that are based in spectral Hall burning patterns or in molecular iodine standards. And together with the necessary dissemination means like satellite links and optical fiber links to disseminate and to be able to compare all these frequency standards. All my experiments has been located in this shaded area. And from now on, I'm going to start to describe my work, giving you the necessary context and to show you and present the results that I have obtained. So let's start by measuring optical frequencies with and from an optical frequency comm. In order to take meaningful measurements, we need to reference the comm, and we choose to lock it to a laser that is locked in turn to an ultra-stable cavity at 1542 nanometers. So we beat this infrared reference laser to the comm, and the first thing we do in our lab is to remove the offset of the comm. And now this offset-free optical bit node, we phase lock it to a stable RF source that is a DDS. And then once the error signal is generated, we apply a feedback on the femtosecond laser cavity via a fast actuator that is an intracavity electro-optic modulator and a slow actuator that is a piezo ceramic attached to the end cavity mirror. So once we have locked the COM, we have been able to transfer the stability of this ultra-stable laser to all the COM teeth. In other words, the COM is working in the narrow line width regime, where the teeth in the visible and near infrared domain have at most sub-hertz line widths. Regarding the different COM outputs that we are going to use in the following, we have the main COM output that is not only used to lock the COM, but is also used to detect, to derive the repetition frequency. We have a second output that comes after a first erbium doped fiber amplifier that is used to detect the offset of the COM, and also it provides us with a spectrum between 1 micron to 2 microns. Another output that comes after the second optical amplifier that is pretty similar to the former one, but here the EDFA has been optimized at 1396 nanometers because part of it is going to be frequency double in order to have a narrow bandwidth COM center at 698. That is the frequency that we need, the wavelength that we need for the strontium clock laser. So now that the COM is ready, let's derive an optical frequency with the COM. The first thing we need to do is to form a bit node between the laser under test, that is nu L, versus the closest tooth of the COM. And then on the other side, we need to derive the repetition frequency that is compared to the FUMR, the microwave reference of the lab, and we choose the 36 harmonic because the repetition frequency is at 250 megahertz and thus is close to the 8.9 giga of the FUMR. But the question here is, are we able to count these signals properly? The first device we come across is a frequency counter that is in charge of following, detect, and count for the phase oscillations of the different signals. This counter has a fixed sample rate of 1 kilosample per second, and strictly speaking, is a phase recorder. And the frequency is derived from 2 consecutive readings over a gate time or report interval. As any instrument, as any measurement instrument, it has a resolution, and in this case is fixed at 12.2 picoseconds. For instance, when we send different frequencies generated by a synthesizer that is externally locked to a source with a negligible noise, we can see on the right, on the top right plot, that for frequencies higher than 10 megahertz, we are already limited by the resolution of the counter. And for lower frequencies, we are limited by the internal noise of the counter due to the sine to square conversion, noise conversion. So coming back to the frequency comparison in order to derive the FREP, the intermediate frequency that we have at the output of the mixer, it is at 55 megahertz, and it has a noise, a frequency stability, fractional frequency stability at 7×10⁻⁻15 that is dominated by the microwave noise due to both signals. This fractional noise is expressed in absolute terms by the red line in the bottom left plot, and we can see the black line that represents the counter's resolution that scales with the different input frequencies. So the signal noise is already hidden by the counter's resolution. So the strategy is to demodulate further this intermediate signal at 275 kilohertz and to multiply it by 200. This way, we not only multiply the carrier that comes back to the 55 megahertz, but we also multiply the noise that is precisely what we want to quantify. And we can see that now the noise at 55 megahertz is around 20 times higher than the counter's resolution. And what we want to check is that this multiplication process is not adding any noise, or is adding, let's say, a negligible noise. For that, we take two independent 200 multiplier boxes. We compare one against the other, and we see that the absolute stability yields 70 microhertz. That, once we scale in terms of the frequency we were comparing, it corresponds to 3 × 10⁻17 at 1 second. That is more than 2 orders of magnitude below the noise of the signal itself, that it was at 7 × 10⁻15. In the optical domain, due to the finite signal-to-noise ratio of the optical bit nodes, because of the limited optical power of a single COM mode, we need to filter these optical bit nodes before counting them. Since all the lasers we work on are ultra stable and they have a line width below 1 Hz, it is justified to filter them in a 1 kHz bandwidth. And we know that any filter introduces a frequency-dependent phase shift, and we want to know to which extent it introduces frequency inaccuracies due to the unavoidable drift of the optical bit node when it moves and explores the phase of the filter. We check that for our filters, for a typical drift of 1 Hz per second, we obtain a frequency offset of 0.5 millihertz, that in relative units, for a frequency of 194 terahertz, it corresponds to 3 × 10⁻18 frequency bias. That is perfectly compatible with our optical lattice clocks. Now I'm going to show you how we compare clocks and oscillators at CERT. Here we have a very, very simplified scheme of an optical lattice clock. And on the top side, on the bottom side, we see the clock laser. Part of it is sent to our lab, the COM lab. And what we do is to measure the free running ultra stable clock laser. And then in the clock lab, what they do is to derive an atomic correction that we call F-bridge. And then combining these two quantities, we are able to reconstruct the real optical atomic frequency. But this frequency, in fact, is measured in terms of the hydrogen measure, since all the instruments are referenced to it. And additionally, and thanks to the availability of 3 atomic fontaines at CERT that are continuously operating, in the fontaines lab, they are able to correct, to derive the offset between the measure and the fontaines that are realizing the SI second. And finally, we're able to express the absolute value of an optical frequency in terms of the scission atoms. To compare two optical clocks, we proceed in the same way. We derive the optical frequency of the first clock. We derive the optical frequency of the second clock. And then, thanks to the transfer oscillator method that I will explain later, we're able to form this frequency ratio where the repetition frequency of the COM is almost completely eliminated. The goal is to derive this ratio at the 10⁻18 level. And the beauty of this equation is that the first 7 significant digits are given by the NCOM numbers, and the next 11 digits are given by the second term, where are the measured frequencies. Note, however, that this equation is not self-sufficient, because in the second term, we still have one of the 2 optical frequencies involved, but this is not a problem because we need to know this term with a resolution of 10⁻18. So knowing the value of this optical frequency at the kilohertz level is enough, so we can use the recommended value by the CIPM for the secondary representations of the second. So my work was focused on comparing the different optical oscillators. So let's see, when we measure a laser in terms of a microwave frequency via an optical frequency COM, if this laser is contained the main COM output, we can just directly lock the COM to this laser, and then we simply need to derive the repetition frequency. And this is in fact what we do with our reference laser. If it's not, but is still contained within the spectral bandwidth provided by the other COM outputs, we need to derive the optical bit node, and then we replace the FREP value derived from the former lock. So in our case, we have seen that we are limited at 7⁻⁻15. And this is due to the microwave noise signals involved in this comparison. And on the other hand, we know from an out-of-loop measurement of the cryosapphire oscillator that is comprising our FUMR. Our cryosapphire oscillator was compared with another cryosapphire oscillator from the Femto ST in Besançon. And thanks to this comparison, we know that the frequency, the fractional frequency stability of our UMR is between 2 and 3 10⁻⁻15. So at this point, we are totally aware that the frequency stability of our signal is degraded by the microwave generation scheme. In fact, there are other groups at CIRS that are working on that, and they do it much better. But for our application, it's more than enough. To compare the lasers in the optical domain, since the COM is locked to the ultrastable reference laser, nu IREF, comparing these lasers versus the COM is equivalent to compare these lasers versus the nu IREF laser. For instance, if we pay attention to the orange curve between the strontium clock laser and the IREF laser, we see that we are limited at 8⁻⁻16 at 1 second. We have a flicker floor up to 10 seconds, and the floor is at 8⁻⁻16. This frequency stability is what the theory tells us for the combined contribution of both ultrastable lasers. So far, so good. But the question now is, what if our lasers would have been much better? Would our COM, would our measurement system be able to see further? And this is precisely what we want to characterize: the noise, the ultimate optical noise floor introduced by the system. Let me quickly remind that when we measure two different lasers against the COM and we use the same COM output, we call this approach single branch. And here, the noise is in common mode. So it's not seen in the comparison between the two lasers. In contrast, when one of the two lasers cannot be beaten in the same optical COM output and has to be beaten in a dedicated optical output, the important thing here is there's a differential phase noise between the two outputs. And this is precisely what we want to check. We want to see what is the contribution of these two outputs independently. For that, regardless of the spectral broadening in any of the COM outputs after the optical amplifiers and the high nonlinear fibers, there is still enough optical power at 1542. And what we are going to do is to form two out of loop measurements with the light of the infrared reference laser that is also locking the COM. So this way, we have been able to check the real noise corresponding to each of the two outputs. And we have found that it corresponds to 1⁻⁻16 after 10 seconds, and the difference of them between them is in the mid ⁻⁻17. This limitation comes from the uncompensated optical paths by the residual propagation noise and by possible noise added by the amplifiers themselves. So now we have studied the different stabilities when comparing one oscillator against another one. But what we want to really assess is the stability of everything that is not the oscillators. So for that, we have built independent frequency chains attached to the 3 different independent comms with independent connections. And what we are going to do is to measure the same quantity simultaneously by pairs between 2 different comms. And we want to know the level of agreement of the measure of the differential measurement and to see if the result depends on the measurement tool. The different frequencies that we have measured in the microwave domain versus the UMR are these, and we have done different combinations between the different pairs of comms. The first comparison we did, it was of the mercury clock laser and the strontium-1 versus the UMR between the erbium fiber COM1 and the TISA COM. And we found a fractional instability at 1 second of 5×10⁻⁻15. We believe that this short-term instability limitation is due to the photo detection and the amplification of the microwave and the photonic microwave signal and the other microwave signal involved. Because we already checked that the noise introduced by the COM outputs regarding the erbium fiber COM was not affecting the measurement. The second measurement we did, it was exactly the same, but between the 2 erbium fiber COMs. Here, in the same way, the measurement was not limited by any of the COM amplifiers. Now we are adding the 2 blue ones corresponding to the second fiber COM. But we can see that the measurements performed between the
The sound has gone once again. Sorry.
That's good.
Okay, it's good.
I was saying that the measurement performed between the fiber COMs is slightly
now it's okay. Thank you.
Performed between the fiber COM and the TISA COM, and this is due to the fact that the 2 fiber COMs are in different labs, and the microwave signal that sends the signals to the 2 labs comes in 2 independent microwave links, compensated but independent. While the fiber COM1 and the TISA COM, they are in the same lab and they share the same microwave link, and the noise is in common mode. This is the reason. That's why it's a bit lower. And finally, we perform 3 other measurements corresponding to the infrared laser beaten against the 3 different outputs of the COM. That it yields exactly the same stability as before. So in overall, we have seen that all the measurements are compatible to 0, that no bias is resolved by the statistical resolution reached, and that all the stabilities are below the 10⁻⁻14. That is the stability yield by the atomic fontaines. Also, we are able to reach the 10⁻16 resolution only after 200 seconds. That corresponds to the accuracy of the fontaines after 2 or 3 days of averaging. On the optical part, we did exactly the same, but this time we form different optical frequency ratios and we measure simultaneously between the different pairs of COMs. These are the frequencies at play. So the first comparison, it was the ratio of the strontium clock laser and the mercury clock laser respect to the infrared laser. And we did the measurement between the 2 fiber COMs in single branch. And now here we see that we are limited at 8×10⁻17 at 1 second. When we did, for the case of the mercury, when we did the same measurement But in multi-branch, now we see that the stability is degraded around a factor 5. And this is due to the fact that now in multi-branch, the different noises of the COM outputs are at play, and they are limiting the stability curves, especially the COM outputs of the second erbium fiber COM. And finally, we perform a fifth ratio between the frequencies of the strontium and mercury clock lasers, and between the erbium fiber COM1 and the TISA. Here, at this time, the erbium fiber, the fiber COM was in multi-branch, but still is not limiting the measurement, as we can see. And the limitation here came from the uncompensated optical fiber links, that they were too long. And this is one of the things that we started to improve. So here we have an overall of all the frequencies, of all the frequency ratios. And as before, all the measurements are compatible to 0. No bias is resolved. In single branch, we are with stabilities in the order of 10 to the minus 16 or lower that are compatible with the stabilities of the optical lattice clocks nowadays. And we are able to reach the 10 to the minus 18 level that is compatible with the best published results of optical clocks. Due to these results obtained by comparing the operational frequency chain against these two new independent frequency chains, this has led us to establish a second independent backup measurement system, especially useful during the calibration campaigns, comparison campaigns in a continental scale at CERT. In this framework, where I was involved together with more than other 50 people, I developed 2 extra tools. The first one was to improve the laser that is not only locking our COM, where our COM is locked to, but is also disseminated via the REFIMEF French optical fiber link for metrology. This laser was already drifted, but what I did is to add an integration term that acts on the proportional lock, and this way we are able to keep the frequency, let's say absolute frequency of this laser locked to a constant, to a value, to this value that we have in the screen that was chosen intentionally. And we observed that in a time slot of 10 days, it only had fluctuations of plus minus 3 Hertz. And the second extra tool that I developed, it was an auto-relocking system that allows to rearm the optical phase lock loop between the COM and the ultrastable laser. When, for example, someone bumps into the table or there's a vibration and the loop breaks. Also, it allows us to prevent unavoidable failures due to the finite dynamics of the phase lock loop. And also we can remote control it, the lock from home. The last part of my PhD was dedicated to spectral purity transfer techniques. The reason for this is because we need highly stable optical sources to be able to interrogate the narrow optical clock transitions in optical clocks that are in the visible domain. Usually these highly stable sources are stabilized in Fabry-Perot cavities. And nowadays it's well known that these cavities are limited by the Brownian noise of the atoms comprising the cavity itself, like the spacer, the substrates of the mirrors, or the coatings. And this is the reason why the best ultrastable lasers nowadays that have demonstrated instabilities of 410 to the minus 17 are built in the infrared domain, because it's precisely where the thermal noise of these cavities can be better averaged. So our objective was double. On the one hand, we wanted to transfer the stability of our best cavity, that is the mercury cavity at 1062, that it was at 4 × 10⁻16 at 1 second, to the cavity used for the Strontium clock laser in order to be able to interrogate both clocks with the same local oscillator sharing the same noise. And on the other hand, and due to the current development of a new infrared ultrastable source at CIRT, we wanted to prepare the setup and to leave it ready to be able to make transfers from the infrared domain to these two other cavities. The principle of this technique is the following. We want to transfer the stability of our best laser, the master, to a less good laser that is the slave, that has not need to be a priori stabilized. We form the two optical bit nodes against the COM. We remove the offset frequency, and then we filter and we rescale these two optical bit nodes offset free in such a way that the repetition frequency, that was the second degree of freedom is still in the equation, it can be rejected to a noise to a level good enough to be not good enough to not have it into account in the final noise of the transfer. So finally, from this quantity, we are able to form a transfer bit node that only contains the information of the master oscillator and the slave oscillator, and then we apply a feedback, in this case on the slave laser, but just switching the cables, the feedback could be applied in the other one. If we assume an negligible noise in this process, at the end, we will have a fractional stability of the slave laser equal to the fractional stability of the master laser. But what we want to assess is the real noise due to the transfer itself, to make sure that it's ready for the new projected fractional stabilities ongoing. For that, we need a second independent frequency COM. We need to double the optical setup that we did in the first COM, in the transfer part. We need to add a second independent frequency chain, and then from the second setup, the readout setup, we are able to form an out-of-loop transfer bit that will account for the noise due to the transfer plus the noise due to the readout. To start with, we implemented a multi-branch transfer from the 1062 cavity to the 698 because the setup, it was already more or less already in place, and we wanted to have a feeling to know what kind of stability we could reach, even if the setup it was in multi-branch and with a lot of parts in fiber. The stability we got, it was at 2 × 10⁻16. That is perfectly fine to transfer the stability from these two cavities, but of course is not good enough to transfer the future fractional stabilities that we are aiming to. So we started to build a single branch approach from the infrared laser to the 1062 first, and then for the 698. For this transfer, the approach was to overlap the continuous wave pins, to reflect them in the same reference plane, and after that, we mix them and we combine them in a pin splitter with the light of the COM, and then they are the 2-bit nodes, they are photodetected in the same photodiode. We can see that the uncompensated paths, they are less than 7 centimeters between the pin splitter and the reference plane. And we put this critical part in a small area of 10 square centimeters to be put under vacuum if necessary in the future. The stability we got, it was at 8 × 10⁻18. That for one system, it corresponds to 5 × 10⁻18. The second single branch transfer, it was from the very same infrared laser to the 698 nanometers laser. The approach was basically the same, but this time, due to the large frequency gap between the two lasers, they had to be detected in different photodiodes, and also the compensation was done in different paths. This is the reason why we have a bit longer uncompensated paths, but still shorter than 15 centimeters. The stability we got this time, it was slightly a bit higher at 4 × 10⁻⁷, 2, 3 for the transfer itself, and still we are thinking what is the reason that prevent us to reach the 10⁻⁸ level. And putting the system under vacuum is a very good candidate to reduce the overall noise of the system. And now, thanks to these two independent single branches transfers, we have combined them, and now we can transfer the stability from the green cavity at 1062 to the orange cavity at 698 in a dual single branch transfer, at the cost of adding this third oscillator in the infrared domain that is going to be eliminated. The result we got for this, it was at 1 × 10⁻⁻16, and one would have expected to be limited by the worst of the former two single branches, that it was at 3/4 × 10⁻⁷, and the reason for that is that we were lacking optical power in the infrared laser, and it was limiting the signal to noise ratios of the different optical bit nodes. So now here you can see the stability of the comparison when forming the ratio between the mercury and the strontium clock lasers. That is at 1 × 10⁻⁻15. And when locking these two ultra-stable clock lasers, transferring the stability from the best to the less good stability, now we are able to have the local oscillators in common mode. And on top of that, we need to synchronously interrogate them. So this way we can reject the dick noise effect. So doing this, we have improved by slightly more than a factor 2 the frequency of the comparison. To summarize, we have seen that we have assessed the microwave stability limits in the for our measurement system. In the microwave domain is at 5 × 10⁻⁻15 due to this photo detection and amplification noise of the microwave signals at play, and we have been able to reach the resolution of 10 to the -16 just only after 200 of seconds of averaging time. In the optical domain, we have got instabilities at 5 × 10 to the -18 when having the systems in single branch, and we are able to reach the 10 to the -18 level only after 100 seconds. We also have automatized the system itself, so now it's much more robust and reliable. And we also have the system ready to proceed with transfers from the infrared domain to the other two cavities, where the best results is again at 5 × 10 to the -18 at 1 second. And we improved the frequency of the comparison between the mercury and strontium clock optical lattice clocks, a bit more than a factor 2. To give you some perspective, the next natural steps that should be done to keep progressing in the same direction is to reference all the optical oscillators adhered to this long cavity that is taking place now, that has a projected stability in the 10 to the -17 range, to start replacing all the interferometers used to compensate the propagation noise of the lights going of the different ultra-stable lights going towards other labs and coming from the other labs to the COM, to put them all of them in free space, To add additional phase lock loops with extra lasers at 1542 that will be phase locked to the unique master oscillator in the infrared domain. And in the medium term, to start generate photonic microwave signals in order to interrogate the atomic fontaines and not rely in the cryo-safari oscillator that in our case, it requires a lot of manpower and maintenance. And in the long run, to go for new stable sources that rely on frequency standards and not in macroscopic standards like for example, the optical cavities. I wouldn't like to finish this presentation without thank to one of the research mobility grants that I was lucky to get from one of the Euramed research projects that gave me the opportunity and the honor to first come at CERT to work with Jan Lecoq and Rodolphe Letargat, and to thank my institution, the Real Instituto y Observatorio de la Armada, ROA, in Spain, that via a collaboration with CERT, they made possible to extend this initial period from the grant and gave me the opportunity to realize this PhD work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hector Alvarez, for this clear and very nice presentation. Now we start the discussion with the member of committee, probably with the first with the reviewer. And voilà. Yann.
So thank you, Hector. First, I wanted to say that it was a real pleasure to read your manuscript.
Thank you very much.
And to review it. And I was very impressed by all the work you've done during your PhD. It's very, very interesting. I have not a lot of questions, but I have some. And the first one would be in the microwave domain. Why do you choose the frequency of 55 megahertz to do your measurement?
Okay, we choose this frequency because our frequency counter, the maximum frequency it can measure is 60 megahertz. So as we have seen, for the counter, going to higher frequencies is much better because the slope of the sine wave is steeper and can be counted with less jitter noise in the counter. In fact, in fact, we demodulate this signal to 275, but in the end, it's 55 megahertz. But the reason is just to go for the highest frequency possible in the counter.
And with your signal at 275, if you amplify the signal with a low noise amplifier, you can get enough slope for your measurement?
From the same frequency we're talking.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that this frequency is when I was talking about the 200 multiplier box, in fact, is an oscillator, a BCO at 55 megahertz that is divided by 200, and then this is phase locked to the 275. So, yeah. So there's no amplification of the signal. The signal is phase locked, is divided by 200, is phase locked to the 275, and then we have a clean signal at 55 megahertz.
Okay. Second question is, I don't really understand the fact that the second erbium fiber was more noisy than the erbium one.
Oh, okay. Well, the reason is very simple. It's because both erbium fiber combs, they are locked to the same cavity, but to the same ultra stable laser locked to the same cavity, but we send this light, ultra stable light, to lock the comb, and then we compensate for this link. And The compensation, the interferometer done in the other lab for the second comb is done in fiber. So it means that we have the one of the branches. I mean, we split the light and in a fiber coupler. So we have like around 20 centimeters of uncompensated propagation noise in this branch of the fiber. While in the erbium fiber comb 1, that is the operational comb, this interferometer, at the beginning it was the same, but this interferometer, we implemented it and we put it in free space. So this is the reason.
Okay. Thank you. One more question on the clock characterization. Are you really sure that the peak effect is rejected for your measurement?
Honestly, no. I'm sure that the transfer is done as expected, but regarding the noise effect, this is more on the optical lattice clock side, and I have not studied in detail the contribution of this frequency sample, of this noise, of the origin of this noise, and if it's rejected totally or not.
Yeah. Because the noise of the transfer is near 10 to the minus 16.
Yes.
And if you look at your comparison, at 1 second, you are near this value. You are around 2 parts, 2.5 per 10 to the minus 16.
Yeah.
And after you reach the value of almost 5, 10 to the minus 16 square root of 2. So what it's a real question. In fact, your laser, don't you think that your laser is at the 10 to the minus 16 level? And do you make the calculation of the D effect with this value of 10 to the minus 16 for the clock comparison?
No. I didn't do any calculation. I just compare the former stability without locking both local oscillators with the new comparison, locking them, making the transfer. But I didn't check anything from a theoretical point of view.
Okay, just the last question for the CIRT competition. Which clock limits now? It's strontium or mercury?
Sorry?
Which clocks limit now? Strontium or mercury?
Well, it's hard to say.
Right. Very good answer.
I would know the answer.
The answer?
Okay, that's all for me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Merci, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would also like to congratulate you for your manuscript and for your presentation, but most importantly for your work. I mean, it is really impressive work. These optical frequency combs have been around for almost 20 years now, or maybe even slightly more than 20 years. And I think these kinds of numbers that you showed today and that are in the manuscripts were just so far away when the first experiments were made. So that's really the achievement after 20 years of work, not only your PhD, but your PhD being, in a sense, the ultimate contribution to this progress. And it is truly remarkable, both in terms of numbers, but also when you think of, and this appears clearly in your presentation, of all the work that is behind. That is, I mean, the smallest uncompensated part at some point leads to an effect that you can observe. I mean, as large as the nose on the face, so that's really, really impressive. The operational dimension also is impressive. I mean, this, you briefly mentioned the fact that you have automated the system and so on and so forth to achieve long measurements. But this is not that easy. And at the end of the day, you have a level of performance that is extremely impressive together with something that is operational. It works every day for a long time. And I must say, I'm very, very impressed by that. Just one point to start the discussion about the ultimate limits of these systems. So you mentioned each time you have a particular measurement, you have a reason for the limitation to the noise, and I think it's quite convincing. But you never give the fundamental limits to that could be in principle achievable. So when you, for each, well, let's just give orders of magnitude. But for spectral purity transfer, for instance, if you reach the photon shot noise of the comb, so what would be the stability at 1 second? Do you have an idea of that?
I would say that the final noise floor could be in the 10 to the minus 19, probably.
Something
just
like that, yes.
Mid 10 to the minus 19 at most.
You think it makes sense at some point to think of reaching this kind of level? Because, I mean, my experience in metrology, that for time frequency metrology, is that you gain an order of magnitude every 10 years. So that's, let's say 30 years. So that's more or less the time you have before you retire. So,
well, the ultimate limit, I mean, in the transfer, since it is done in single branch, the technical noise added by the comb is eliminated. So we could say that this is, if it's well done, is rejected. So the only probable noise at place could come from these small uncompensated optical paths, yes. Reducing them to putting them under vacuum, and also we check. I didn't show here, but we check that the noise added by the phase lock loop. It was in the. I think it was in the high 10 to the minus 19, low 10 to the minus 18. So that's why I was saying that maybe, but we checked this noise. We checked that it was far away from our transfers, and it was good enough. But maybe fine tuning this phase lock, maybe it can be reduced to the mid 10 to the minus 18, but it has to be tested.
Have to have future work to do, yes. Okay, can you come back on slide 21, please, or maybe 23, I think in both. I have something similar I'd like to ask you.
(26).
21. Yes, this one. Something that surprised me when you look at the comparison, I think it's the same for the optical comparison. So if I understand correctly, the points are the frequency difference between the measurements, right? And the error bar is the error bar of the measurement, right? But for all of these measurements, the difference is much smaller than the error bar. So why is that?
You mean the difference of the differential difference is?
If you take, for instance, I don't know, the red points here, well, maybe it's extreme, but even the one at 10 to minus 17, the blue one to the right, the difference is 10 to minus 17. The R bar is 3 times 10 to minus 17. So for one of them, if it happened to one of them, I have no problem with that. But for all the measurements, the difference is much smaller than the R bar. So is there something I don't get here on the...
So the question is that these error bars are not consistent.
The agreement is too good, given the error bars, I would say.
Well, this, I mean, all I can say is that these results are compatible. I mean, the error bar given by the last point of the Allen deviation is compatible to 0, so no bias is resolved.
Yes, but it's too good. You would not expect a difference that is 10 times smaller than the error bar.
We are 1 10 to the minus 2 10 to the minus 17, and the error bar is.
There's still 1/2 of the error bar, 1/3. I mean, you would expect, if you have here like 7 points, so you would expect at least 1 or 2 of them that are above 1 sigma. At least. It's a bit strange. Yes, yeah.
I think that the possible answer to that is that the right metric to use is a modified alarm deviation on this measurement, because this is a phase coherent comparison. And typically, in all those kind of measurements, the difference between the modified and the standard alarm deviation can be quite large.
Okay.
And I suspect that if you try to use the modified more, you might get some lower error bar with still exactly the same average.
Okay. You agree with me that it's surprising to, I mean, it's the same for the optical measurements. I mean, that come on slide 23. I think it's no, the other one
is the average.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, this one. The same. Even the one with the larger difference, 10⁻17. I mean, it's 1/3 of the error bar. So it's much less. It's a bit surprising that for so many measurements, you have all points within 1 sigma.
As it's not modified, maybe the white phase noise increases a bit artificially the error bars, and they could be represented better.
Okay. It's better that way around than the other way around. But still surprising. Okay. Okay. Yes, I have another question about the decay effect that was discussed. I know it's not your own experiment, but maybe you to answer the question. The fact that you have an improvement is a cancellation to some extent of the decay effect. I mean, there cannot be anything else. Okay. But still, you have a factor of 3 improvement, which is very good, actually, and it's a factor of 10 smaller measurement time for given resolution. But it happens to be exactly the same rejection that was observed some 15 years ago on atomic fountain when a similar experiment was done. So we were discussing that earlier. I mean, okay, it's okay, strange enough. But when you compare atomic fountains, you have differences in the geometry of the fountains, right? So the cavities are not the same, don't have the same dimension, so it's difficult to have perfect synchronization of the fountains. For the optical clocks, it's not the case. I mean, you have everything is controlled by the timing of the experiment, and there's no geometrical effect that comes into play. So I was wondering if, I mean, we knew if there was an idea of what was the limit now, because you would expect the decay effect to be very well cancelled. And well, one way to test that is to shift and probably to shift the timing of those clocks to check how the comparison noise vanishes when they are perfectly synchronized. Well, I understand this is not your experiment, but maybe you have been involved in the discussions around that and you have some opinion about that.
Well, no, honestly, no. I mean, this experiment was just at the very end of my stay at CERT, so that's why also the measurement time for the measurement it was quite short. But we wanted just to test after performing this dual single branch that the direct application of interrogating both clocks. And that's why we take this short time measurement, because it was involving basically the 3 complete labs working together, and we demonstrated that we were able to reduce to reject the noise effect to some extent. But it's true that this measurement has to be redone for a much longer stretch of time and to analyze carefully, to be analyzed carefully. Yeah.
Okay. If I understand correctly to this measurement, for the mercury, so you have frequency quadrupling of the infrared laser, right? And this frequency quadrupling can introduce some noise too.
Yes.
Right. Would you have an idea to cancel this source of noise?
And in fact, this I would say that most of the contribution on the mercury side, it comes from this. There are two doubling stages, and this is not compensated at all.
But can we think of a method for compensating that?
You're talking about the CW.
I don't know. I don't have a solution like this.
To circumvent this quadrupling frequency quadrupling.
Yes. Because at the end of the day, it can be a serious limitation to. I mean, you show here that the comms are in fact at a very, very good level, and here we have no way to even if you can compensate that, it's very difficult to estimate.
Yes. The level of, but we could think about a laser in that 531 nanometers, and then to frequency double to frequency double this one instead of starting from in the infrared domain. I mean, we could start from a source in the visible at 331 and then make only one frequency doubling stage as far as this visible source we have, as far as we can transfer a very nice stability from an infrared source locked to an infrared cavity to this new visible light.
But just only half of the problem, right?
Yeah. The other half is still unsolved.
Would there be a way like quadrupling the concept?
So first, Hector did not work at all with the quadrupling. We worked only with the 1062. The UV part is only really the job of the maturity. One of the things we want to study is the limits that are introduced by the doubling of the comp itself. This we want to do that for transfer, but it also applies for materials. Yes, probably there are some ways to compensate the noise introduced by the crystal itself, by doing some small interferometers, by doing an AC interferometer, but getting the light, the seed light, but transmitted by the doubling crystal itself and doing an interferometer there. There are some solutions that we are discussing at the moment, but this was really way beyond the scope of the call.
Yeah, okay. And finally, maybe an easy question, but can you come back to slide 15? Those ones were a bit tough, so we will give that as a last impression. Yes. So this for the red points here, the comparison with the comb. Why is it limited to short times? Is there something that limits or was it not so interesting to measure it for longer times?
I mean, for a longer time, we will start to be dominated by the random frequency and the random walk noise together with the residual drift of the laser itself. But no, there is no particular reason for this short measurement. In fact, it's the one I had at this time, and I used to compare it to. But yeah, I mean.
Yes, and the other comparison are much more interesting, so I understand that you focused on them. But I was just wondering why this one was.
No, we are not hiding anything here.
No. It was not suspecting. Okay, and a final question. On your last slide, you mentioned new stable sources. So what do you have in mind?
Well, there are already ongoing sources that are the spectral hole burning experiments. And this is the only one that is taking place at CIRT. There are also other experiments with molecular iodine cells, but they are not. They are limited around the 410 to the minus 15 at most. But there are other groups that they are working in these super radiant lasers, where the extracted phase information comes directly from the atoms and not from the cavity itself. Also, but this is not based on frequency standards, but it's coming back to cavities. Right now the cavities, apart from being built in the infrared domain, they are also some research putting these cavities under cryogenic environments. that helps to reduce the thermal noise, but at the cost of adding, on the other hand, some vibrations to the systems, and yeah, and that is one has to balance the. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Very interesting.
Okay, I think next.
Well, thank you for both the manuscript and the presentations. Both were really nice to follow, especially again for slightly outsiders. I really appreciated the time you spent defining everything, actually, especially in the manuscript, where you were really, you actually showed quite a lot of pedagogy in the way you actually wrote things. So I really liked it. I have mostly technical questions, and the first one is related to the fact that you demodulate F0 all the time, which sounds, and you actually do mention that new sources are there that are based on different frequency generation. And I was wondering if you had investigated if it would be a nice thing. They do exist at 1.5 micron now. Would that be something useful? Would that bring other noises? Because then you have an additional step, for instance, you have to phase match the DFG crystals and etc. So have you thought about it?
So the question is if we can circumvent this offset in the COM, or if there are other techniques to deal with the offset.
Let's say that you're always demodulating. It's a stage, so it brings noise. That's kind of always there. Yeah. But would that be helpful to just get rid of it, or you're doing it so well already that it doesn't matter?
I mean, we can just, right now, there are these differential frequency COMs that they provide a spectrum offset free for the whole COM. But in our case, we already have our COM with the offset frequency. So now we have two options: either demodulate the offset frequency to have a virtual offset free COM and to demodulate in all the measurements, or we could also lock it as other groups do. And apply the feedback, for instance, via apply feedback on the pump laser of the femtosecond cavity via, for instance, an acoustic modulator. The problem with the erbium fiber COM is that in the pumping, after pumping, then to reach the lacing level, there's the relaxation time from in our case, 980 nanometers to the lacing level. It is around 1 millisecond. So it means that applying a lock via an acoustic modulator that usually has a bandwidth of 500 kilohertz, but due to this three-level atom, to this restriction on the erbium COMs, we will be limited by the 1 kilohertz of this relaxation time. So this is the reason why this technique cannot be directly applied on erbium fiber COMs. And this is the reason why they started to develop intracavity electro-optic modulators to deal with that. So one electro-optic modulator will deals with the repetition frequency, while the other deals with the offset frequency. Also, I read some papers that they are able to use the same EOM to deal with both degrees of freedom at the same time.
Okay, but
yeah.
Then, well, let's say between locking it and just canceling it directly with the DFG, what would you choose?
Well, honestly, I really like this approach of removing it completely. The only precaution we need to have is to keep this offset frequency nicely centered, because it's previously a filter. So we need to keep it nicely centered on the filters. And due to this, in this auto-relocking system program that I did, we also take care of this, of a relocking, not a relocking, but we take care of a slow frequency lock of this offset frequency to keep it locked to keep it centered, in our case, at 70 megahertz, plus minus 1 megahertz.
Okay, and
but yeah, but it's removed. It's not. Yeah.
Yeah, you're removing it afterwards, and obviously it's working really well enough for your application for the moment, at least. But you mentioned your auto relock strategy, and actually this is interesting. Also, it's really nice, as was also mentioned before. It's a really nice feature when you can run your system 24/7 and you actually can stay home and it's just relocking itself. The question is how fast can you relock when you lost it, when you just lose the lock for the first time? It's almost instantaneous. You just have some motorized stage or something.
We are talking about the lock itself, not the offset. I mean,
no, the offset frequency. Okay, I got your answer. But now I'm switching to this because you mentioned it. Because
in fact, the two relocks, they are in independent scripts, so they run in parallel. So the auto relocking, it takes less than 2 seconds, I would say. It's instantly relocked.
Then on what actuator are you playing to relock to? Because let's say it unlocks because you reach the end of the bandwidth of whatsoever actuator. What do you do to push back the system in the center and then relock?
Yeah, our phase lock loop, it has 1 proportional and 3 integrators that they are acting simultaneously on the EOM and in the piezo. But in practice, what we do is we only act on the last integrator. So we keep always close the proportional and the 2 first integrators. So when it's close to the dynamics or with this unlock, we open the last integrator. And then what we do is we act with an offset voltage on the PI3 box, on the PLL itself, via a national instrument acquisition card that has a plus minus voltage range. So we just we apply the unoffset correction on the PLL, on the PI3 of the PLL.
Okay, so do I understand it right that you're not actually pushing the comb back where it was in the first place, or?
No. We also do that. We also do that because we want to relock. We not only want to relock the comb to the ultrastable reference, but we also want to lock it to the same NCOM number.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. And then so you have like some motor, I guess, like some slow feedback that you can add, or yes. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Well, can I go on with my technical questions? It's the next one is actually on the bit knot detection, because you have a nice table where you list all the noise sources, residual technical noise, you call them, and it actually contracts your first page where you say never measure anything but frequency, and you can see that all the noise sources are intensity based mostly, because as soon as you measure frequencies, you have somehow an intensity coming into play. And I've seen the fact that you consider the mode matching. For instance, if you have beams that have different sizes on the detector, you can decrease your signal to noise ratio, basically. Have you considered the effect if the beams have exactly the same size, they are just not perfectly aligned? Can you have something else coming, like some unwanted frequency shift just for that, or is it maybe a stupid consideration?
No, it's a very important consideration. And we, for instance, when measuring the optical bit nodes, as far as we have a signal to noise ratio high enough, like around 35 or 40 dB in a 1 kilohertz bandwidth, is fine. But this is especially important when doing the transfer techniques. And we also, before doing any transfer, we make sure that all the mode matching and all the pins, they are overlapping to a good enough level. But all this detection, the overlapping and the final detection is in free space. So we make sure that, we we make sure that we are within the active area of the photodiode and the signal is at its maximum. But we could think about adding a spatial filtering before detection, just putting a piece of fiber and then being photo detected. So this way we can just deal with these intensity fluctuations that then we can deal with these phase fluctuations that are converted into intensity fluctuations.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have probably a dumb question, actually. It's like coming from interferometers, what we care about all the time is the fact that if two beams are not propagating parallel to each other, you have a frequency offset coming. Can this be the case when you're measuring a bit node directly in free space? Because you have kind of the same, not at all. Maybe it's just no. Like you see what I mean? That one beam is going that way and the other one has a small angle. So the projection of the frequency of the second one on the first one might be slightly, it has an angle. So maybe it just doesn't come at all into play, but for sure for...
I would expect that to add noise, but because you have a component that is parallel, a component that is orthogonal, and the component that is orthogonal needs to be more noise.
Okay, so you basically don't see it. That's the...
I would say that, but then you can expect some effects that... Yeah,
if that changes in time, yes.
Okay, yes.
Is a real question.
Yes, at that level,
you could
have a question.
Yeah, it's... well, a last one, which is like opening much more, is do you see any other field that could benefit from such, like you have targeted everything to optical clocks, which actually makes sense if you're working at CERT. I'm coming from high precision spectroscopy fields. What can I take away from your work? I mean, it's really... I think that even though we maybe not, we don't need the 10 to the minus 18 precision at all, but we actually do need more than what we currently have in the lab. So it's always good to, how do you see, which pieces of your work do you think could spread much more than just your specific field?
Well, I'm just thinking of regarding the spectroscopy, and since we have 3 different combs, we could use just a pair of combs to do this dual comb spectroscopy. But I mean, one of the things that can be recycled from my work is just this ultra-locking system that allows to have the comb perfectly locked continuously. And yeah, as you said, the level of performance you need is not so demanding. So
I'm actually good with this answer. That's not, it was a tough one, but I think the continuous way of locking the laser is a really good thing that, I mean, basically everybody is trying to build their own device in their lab, and it ends up in being a lot of work for everybody. And if someone comes with a solution that could be implemented everywhere, especially if it's designed, for instance, for an erbium fiber laser, which is so widespread, then everybody would be interested, honestly. And yes, doing dual comb, for instance, even though you don't need to know your molecular line with 10 to the minus 18 precision, you still need the comb to be very well locked to be able to get your much worse precision on your spectra. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I think now you can switch.
Yes.
I'm sorry, switch to our colleague in Madrid. No, okay, I think it's sorry. Our colleague first.
Do you hear me?
For example, okay, Professor Pedro Corredera, por favor. Do you have some questions? You hear me?
Yeah, we cannot hear you very well.
Cannot hear you.
We are increasing the volume right now. I will go next to the speaker.
Oh my God. Yes, come try again.
Professor Infante.
Yes, can you hear me?
Perfectly, now perfectly, yes.
Okay. May I proceed, President?
Yeah, Professor Infante.
Yes. Hello once again.
Very well now.
Can you hear me well?
Perfect now.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you. I will remove the camera because the signal will be better. Thank you, Mr. Alvarez, for your work, for your clear presentation, and congratulations that you were able to just to condensate so much work in just less than an hour. Really represents a real progress and advances in the optical frequency comm technologies. And of course, I congratulate also your directors for that really great job. Let me just a couple of technical issues. The first one is I wonder about the power output of the COM teeth. I mean, my concern is because you need to combine two lines to obtain the offset frequency, isn't it? Separated an octave and interact it in a nonlinear crystal, let's say a PPLN crystal, which is critically dependent of the power. And you talked very little about the power. Can you say something about it? Have you enough power in one single line to be combined in a nonlinear crystal? Because the efficiency, you know, it's let's say proportional to the intensity of the beam.
Yeah, regarding the optical power of a single COM mode, for instance, when we do a bit node, this is COM mode, single COM mode power is in the picowatt, or in the best cases in the nanowatt, but this is compensated by the high optical power of the continuous wave laser beam. So here is not a problem at all. But regarding your question about the F0 generation in this F2F interferometer, where we beat this low frequency part of the COM, that with frequency double, and then we compare it with the high frequency part. Here one has to take into account that is not only this bit is not only due to let's say a COM mode at 1 micron that is frequency double, and then this is compared with the other COM mode at 2 microns. In this frequency process, there are a lot of modes that are contributing to the signal. Right now, I'm not able to say how many modes, but the trick here, the key of this process is that many modes contribute to this coherent interference of all these modes that constructively interfere, and they give access to the final offset frequency.
Okay, thank you. And the second one is regarding the clock based on earning fiber. I would like that you tell us how to avoid the noise come from nonlinear effects, because it is also power dependence. Have you problems about the nonlinearity coming from the power dependence in the optical fibers?
Well, honestly, the highly nonlinear fibers, they are implemented they are inside the APM fiber amplifier. They are in the same box, and this is it's a commercial device, so we don't have any access to these fibers, and we are not able to study the non-linearities introduced. So I have to say that in my work I have not studied, I have not characterized the effects of these non-linearities. The only frequency double stage that I have analyzed is just the frequency doubling of the 1397 nanometers to reach the 698 for the strontium clock laser. And what we did is just to characterize it as a function of the temperature, but we saw that in a range of plus minus 3 Celsius degrees, it didn't change the optical power. It barely changed, so it didn't have any impact to this final targeted frequency.
Okay, thanks. Now let me ask you some general questions or general issues. You talk about the possibility of comparing your results with other laboratories. Is that difficult? And also, how many laboratories around the world are working in optical frequency comms?
Well, right now, I don't know exactly the magnitude, the magnitude of laboratories that are working with frequency comms, but I could say that it's a huge number, because optical frequency comms, they are not only useful for the kind of application for the kind of applications we are interested in for metrology applications, but they are in a lot of range of fields such as astronomy or geophysics. Also for a microwave low noise generation for military applications like radars or weapon systems. So yeah, I wouldn't be able to give a number. I could give a number maybe in metrology institutes that it could be around more than 50 labs, around 50 labs that they are using comms for
metrology applications.
For frequency metrology.
And another one is, when do you expect the optical frequency comms become the standard for definition of the second in the international system of units? Or connected to that, what is the actual accuracy of the seconds, and what is the requirement for the optical frequency comms for substituting the standard based on cesium clocks?
Well, the current uncertainty on the realization of the SI second is given by the best microwave clocks that are the atomic fontaines based on the cesium. That is the reference frequency where the definition of the second rests.
Okay.
And the optical frequency comms, they are just a tool to measure, to characterize the optical frequencies of this new generation of optical clocks that they are much more stable and accurate than their counterparts in the microwave domain. But the frequency comm is just a tool to that has allowed to characterize properly these clocks. And it is true that in the coming years we are going to see a new redefinition of the SI second in terms of an atomic transition. And there's a lot of candidates going around the world. Like there are like around 25 labs with that they have already these prototypes of optical clocks, but a lot of more efforts are needed in able to have like a well-spread network of these clocks that allow us that give us robustness in order to be able to generate an optical time scale based on these frequency standards, regardless of the final atomic speed that is chosen at the end.
Okay, let me ask you finally, let's say personal question, let's say. In case you obtain your doctorate, have you in mind to transfer all your knowledge acquired at CIRT to the Real Observatorio de la Armada in Spain? Is that possible? That's difficult. Have you in mind?
Of course, all my colleagues from my institute, they are.
No, I don't want a polite answer. I want a real answer.
Yeah. No, it's this is the only purpose that I asked for this research mobility grant in the attached to a joint research program in Euramed, that it was which objective was to reduce the uncertainty of optical clocks. It was called OC18, and everything comes because nowadays in Spain, well, already 4 years ago we were thinking of going for an optical frequency standards, because at my institute we are in charge of the national time scale, as the same in the same way as the Observatory of Paris does for France, but our capacities are a bit lower because we only rely on microwave frequency standards. So in cesium and in commercial thermal cesium clocks and in hydrogen masers. So we were thinking at that time that we should to move on optical frequency standards, because of the great progress that is taking place, and that is going to lead the community, the time and frequency community, to define the new unit in terms of these optical transitions. And that's why the decision of training the new personnel coming to the time department of ROA was to be trained on these new technologies and challenging technologies. And this is the reason I came here. And I was lucky enough to get this grant, and it was an honor to me to work in a state-of-the-art laboratory as CIRT, that is between the few labs in the world with such capacities, not only in the microwave domain with the best atomic fontaines, but also in the optical domain with these three optical lattice clocks, and also in this COM field metrology. And of course, next week we are going to start our optical frequency activities, and for that, at my institute, we have already started a project for a future optical clock, and we already have some systems like optical frequency COMs and an ultra-stable cavity to start with, and to step by step and with time and getting knowledge, this is our medium long-term objective.
Okay, just congratulations again to you and your director for that nice and great job. Thank you, President.
Thank you, Professor Rifanti. Professor Corridera, please. You hear me? It's okay? Do you have some questions or comments? Your microphone?
We cannot hear him. Probably Pedro has a problem with the microphone. Very little, Pedro. Almost nothing.
No. Maybe you can call the Zoom number.
Yeah, you have called him this phone, is possible, yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Pero buenas tardes, no somos capaces de verte, era para, si tienes alguna pregunta, me la haces por aquí directamente y yo la repito y intento contestar.
You can put the speaker on, yeah.
Pedro, I'm going to put you in speakerphone so everybody can hear you here in the room. Okay. Okay.
Congratulations for the work and the memory and the presentation. For me, it has been very, very easy to follow with. Congratulations for the director too. I have two curiosities, no more. The first one is relative to the noise in order to transfer the frequencies. It's more or less to recall the question from Professor Inés Lipante. What is the maximal length of fiber do you use in order to transfer the different experiments between the lab?
Okay. So yeah, regarding, I mean, the fibers sending the light from our lab to other labs and receiving the lights from other local optical oscillators, bringing the light to our labs. They have like some of them they are 20 meters long, others they are 50 meters long, but we compensate for this propagation noise introduced by the fiber itself. And we do it to, and the critical part here is in the interferometer at the beginning of the setup, where we have a reference arm from the most ultra-stable point that where we beat the initial light with the light that has go back and forth and then is beaten with the initial light. I mean, in the interferometric unit, we have the initial light that is beaten with the light that has gone back and forth, and where we have put a frequency shifter in between to be able to detect this bit node. So the critical part here is this interferometer to put it in free space, because we have seen that it is in the appendix C of my manuscript. We have seen that for roughly 10 centimeters of uncompensated fiber, we have instabilities in the low 10 to the minus 17 at 1 second. But when we go for free space, this was not done during my PhD, but I know that from a postdoc that has come to my former lab here at CERT, he has done this free space interferometer, and he has gotten an instability of 3/4 10 to the minus 18 that I'm going to, in fact, I have it here as a backup slide, this noise. So I'm going to show you in the screen. These are the measurements done by Angelique. And here we can see that this free space interferometer, it has instability of 3/4 10 to the minus 18 from going to the fiber to the free space. And also to, well, in this case, both of them, they are free space, but with the difference of closing the setup or not. But even a closed setup in fiber, it also has instabilities at the 10 to the minus 17. For a long link, first we need to take into account the length of the link. That will establish the bandwidth of the link itself. So the time it takes the light go back and forth, and this will limit the bandwidth of the link, so the time we have to correct for the noise of this laser. And according to the length of this link, then if it's too long, and we have a very narrow laser. In order to avoid this noise degradation, what we can do is just to cut this fiber link and to split it into chunks and then compensate for each of these short stretches of the link, just to avoid this. So you mean my own contribution, my person? Okay. Well, honestly, all the measures that I have shown today here, I have done it by myself. If I have to highlight something, it could be this auto locking system that is really it really helps to especially in the operational fibercom, because we are in charge of many optical frequency measurements for the other labs. So this could be what I consider one of the biggest contributions. And also the spectral purity transfer. Here, the only thing that I didn't do by myself, it was just one of the transfers between two wavelengths that I did it in parallel with another student in 2018 from Denmark. And this second part of the setup, we did it together. But the rest of the things, I have done it by myself.
We are going to see you a similar system working in San
Yeah, there is no doubt. We will do our best.
Thank you, Professor Cordera. Now we switch to Luca.
So thank you, Saida. Well, first of all, I would like to stress that my personal involvement in this thesis was modest. And in fact, it's really Rodolphe who needs to be commended on making at least 80% of the supervision of this work. And by the way, in the traditional French system, it probably means that some HDR would have to be worked on in not so long a time. Well, okay, I will of course not ask a question. There was already many questions, but I would like to remind that Hector come here at CERT originally as part of a European project from Euromed and the European Union, which of course needs to be thanked a lot for providing the money for that. And I would like also to stress that these are important programs at the European level because it allows collaborations at the international level. And I'm not completely sure that this collaboration with ROA would have taken place as efficiently if the European money was not involved in creating those kind of opportunities. So after coming with, as a part of this European project, he showed himself to be a great guy, very reliable and a very serious student. So it was decided to follow up with an actual PhD program. And we are all extremely happy with all the work that he has done at CERT, and I'm sure that ROA will be extremely happy with all he has learned and all the research talent that he has acquired for himself in the future. And we are, of course, looking forward to keeping this collaboration going along with ROA in general and with Hector in particular when he will be apparently next week starting his project on optical clocks. I would also like to stress that his work has been here at CERT has been extremely important for many things, but in particular, I would like to stress that this is extremely important work for the future redefinition of the second in terms of optical frequency standards. Because, well, there is some current plans for changing the definition of the second, but that will come only at the moment where many different or several institutions will be capable of doing regularly some calibration of the atomic international time with optical clocks. And there has already been a couple of contributions to calibration of TAI made with secondary frequency standards, including in some cases some optical frequency standards. And this is very difficult piece of work, which requires a lot of synchronization between different institutions, a lot of efforts, a lot of synchronization between different people inside some of the institutions. And the work, technical and scientific work that Hector has done is very typical of what is required to do this kind of thing in the future. And it is very important that this kind of work is done in other institutions around the world in the future. So that was some work that he has done, and very serious and very thorough characterization of everything that can be said about absolute accuracy of the frequency comparison with optical frequency comp. And he's been extremely good at targeting the utmost possible accuracy in this work, and that is very important as well. I must say that in the old time, when I was doing some optical frequency comp myself, we did some optical frequency transfer at a reasonable level, but the accuracy of the frequency comparison we did not publish because it was typically an order of magnitude larger than the stability we obtained, and that was not very good to show. But now that Hector has worked extremely well on this aspect, we can have some great correspondence, great agreement between the stability that we show and the accuracy that we can claim. He has also made some very important contributions on the reliability of the system, having an operational frequency comp connected to many different wavelengths in a reliable ways. That's nowadays something that works almost all the time, continuously. And again, that is absolutely necessary for the future redefinition of the seconds to have instruments like that in national metrology institutes. And Hector has been really essential. Hector work has been extremely important in that aspect. So I will not keep on going at that forever, but there's a lot of extremely good things to talk about for Hector's work. He's a very serious, very reliable person, and I'm sure that he's in his next work at ROA on optical frequency standards, he will be an extremely valuable, make some extremely valuable contributions to the field.
Thank you.
Okay, so like everybody, I will congratulate you. So since I'm the one who worked directly with Hector, maybe I can talk a little bit more about himself. So first, as Jan reminded, he came here with a research mobility grant, so it's a Euramet funding. They are very convenient. These grants, they allow staff researchers, sometimes even senior researchers, to move from one institute to the other for a duration that can be up to a year or even a bit more than a year, and they can come in very good conditions. They can move with their families if they want. So initially Hector came, I think it was in February 2017, and he was planned to stay for a year, but clearly we were extremely happy with his work, and we offered him to stay longer and to follow this PhD program. I think it's fair to say that you had little experience when you came. You had never worked much in a lab, but you know, I was never worried. Never was I worried, because you took things extremely seriously from the very first day. I think you started to stay late the very first day. I was really impressed. Then I thought maybe it's a one shot, but no, he actually stayed late every night, or almost every night. And I think what's important is that you really took charge of the experiment. So you did not really know how it was working, but you really wanted to understand and you really wanted to make it work. Sometimes you did things in your own way, but it always worked. And also, another thing that I find really interesting is that even when you did not know exactly what you were doing, you were always getting the results that were expected. And this, seriously, I think it's called intuition. And I think that it's extremely important for an experimental physicist. Okay. Of course, it's a huge amount of work that you have done. It was actually impossible to put everything in your PhD thesis. So, for instance, one of the questions that Lucille asked was, how well are you sure that F0 is eliminated? We are actually pretty sure because we found out an alternative way to demodulate F0 without detecting it. And we compared the two ways of demodulating, and we found that they were in agreement in the 10 to the minus 19 regime. This is really important, but there was already so much to describe in your thesis that we could not squeeze that and keep the manuscript compact enough. So it's one of the several things we chose to remove, even though it's a super important result. Many of the things that you have done, they necessitated many iterations between you and I. So for instance, this auto relock thing, indeed now it relocks in 1 second, but I remember the first version was relocking the COM in 10 minutes. And then we were a bit like, can you really call that an auto relock? I mean, it's faster to come to the lab and then relock it yourself. So, but still it was because when we started, it was not clear what were the right quantities to look at to decide, is it still locked or not? And this, I don't know how many versions of these things we did. And now the code is very short and compact, but it's because there were many iterations to decide what is it really that must be done. Okay. So yes, and then everything here you did with really with a commitment that forces the respect of all the members at CIRT, I would say. So from the personal point of view, I must stress that Hector is a very pleasant guy. He's always in a good mood. It's really a secret for me. I don't know how you do that. You're always in a good mood. You always have this positive attitude, and this, I think, it's somehow it's also very inspiring to work in such conditions. So I also feel very grateful for that. You're also, I think, by nature, a very accommodating guy. One of the things that Hector did not talk about at all, I think, is that on top of the research work that he was carrying out, he was in charge of this operational comp. So each time someone in the lab needed a frequency measurement, a stability measurement, anything along these lines, he or she was coming to ask Hector. And Hector was always able to respond in a few minutes or in a few hours to change the setup, even sometimes, to perform the measurement that was needed. And of course, for him, it was not necessarily convenient, but you know, he was playing by the book. There are many needs at CIRT. You need to adapt. And yes, sometimes you come in the morning, you have your own projects, and in the end, you end up doing the project of somebody else. That's part of the game, because there are many requirements. So I think the way you have been available for anybody at CIRT in need of help, I think it's one of the big capacities that you have shown during your stay here. So you're also someone who is asking a lot of questions, so it can be challenging at times for your supervisor, but overall you were an extremely pleasant PhD student, and it was really extremely pleasant to supervise your work. Lo has hecho muy bien, muy bien. Has trabajado con mucho corazón y has aprendido muchas cosas. Creo que puedes estar muy orgulloso.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So after that, it's so hard for me to conclude. So I congratulate you again for the quality and the quantity of the work presented here. I'm from meteorology, and I know that for such kind to obtain such a result, you need to master a lot of technical aspects, but also to understand all the subtle phenomena, physical phenomena that underline the experiment. And I really congratulate you for your work. So I have just to finish two small questions. The first one is just curiosity. In the slide 21, how you, I think, no, not the one with the error bars with accuracy, where you show this one, yeah. How you obtain the evaluate the error bar? You do all the budget error, or you?
We just take the last point of the error deviation that give us the statistical resolution for the time measurement.
Okay. Okay. So, if I understand, the main limitation currently is due to the noise of the link. Yeah, you agree with me?
The noise of the link, together with the photo detection noise, plus the microwave noises. I mean, the photonic microwave signals from the COM, the photo detection of this one, and then the amplification noise of this also microwave photonic signal, and the microwave signal that comes from the cryo-sapphire oscillator.
One can say that you are limited by technical noise.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can say that. So my question: imagine that you have 3 frequency combs in different spectral range, where some tooth overlap, and then you transfer the stability of ultra-stable optical clock to the first one. There are some fundamental limit on transferring the stability to the other one. No technical, just fundamental limits.
What could be the fundamental limit when transferring to two different COM lines?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Probably a stupid question. I don't know.
I mean, if we lock both COMs to the same optical oscillator, this noise is in common mode. So then the fundamental limit would come from the two noise, the noise of the COMs themselves. Here I'm thinking maybe if we take into account only the small bandwidth COM after each of the main outputs, just removing the optical amplifiers and high nonlinear fibers that could be in between, then the ultimate noise would come probably from the mod lock mechanism, the way that the pulses are derived, and the maybe there's a bandwidth limitation from locking this COM to the ultra-stable source. Although the source is removed, because we said that the two COMs are to this one, but maybe this bandwidth of the phase locking could be a limitation. And probably the noise due to the pump diode lasers, or maybe using ultra low noise current drivers to drive these pump lasers. It helps in the overall process, but this would be a technical noise. It's not a fundamental noise. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you again. I think I can stop here. I don't know, you have to switch the connection with
So
okay. You will stay here?
No, first we stay, and then we two leave, you discuss, or whatever you prefer, whichever order.
Okay. But we have to close the connection with YouTube, no? Yeah.